The plasma bolt scorched past Corporal Kane Vortex's helmet, close enough that he could taste the ozone through his respirator's filters. He pressed himself deeper into the crystalline trench on Meridian Prime, his rifle's targeting computer, painting hostile signatures across his visor. 47 Koltari warriors, advancing through the amethyst formations that jutted from the planet's surface like broken teeth. "Command, this is Echo 7, Vortex whispered into his comm unit, watching the spider-like aliens skitter between cover with their characteristic 8-legged grace. "We've got heavy contact at Grid Delta 9, requesting immediate orbital support." The response crackled through static. "Negative, Echo 7. Maintain defensive posture. Extraction in 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Vortex's jaw clenched as he watched Private Stellan Rue, barely 19 and 3 months out of basic fumble, with a fresh power cell for his plasma rifle. The kid's hand shook so violently he dropped it twice before managing the slot at home. Beside him, Sergeant Naya Grimm kept her weathered face impassive, but Vortex caught the way her eyes tracked the Keltari's methodical advance. She knew. What he knew. They wouldn't last 10 minutes, let alone 40. The Koltari had been humanity's nightmare for 3 years. 8 feet tall, with chitinous exoskeletons that could deflect most small arms fire and neural interfaces that allowed them to coordinate attacks with high mind precision. Their homeworld of Vector had spawned a dozen colony fleets, each one spreading their influence like a cancer across human space. Meridian Prime was supposed to be humanity's first major victory, a resource-rich world that would give the Terran Defense Coalition the rare minerals needed to upgrade their weapons. Instead, it had become a slaughter movement to a clock. Grimm hissed, raising her rifle. A Koltari scout emerged from behind a violet crystal spire, its 4 eyes scanning their position with predatory intensity. The alien's mandibles clicked in what Vortex had learned to recognize as communication with the rest of its pack. The opening salvo came without warning. Koltari plasma fire turned the crystal shelter into molten slag, forcing the 3 humans to scramble deeper into the trench system. Rue screamed as superheated shards peppered his back, the rookie's armor smoking but holding. "They're flanking us," Grimm shouted over the weapon's fire. Her rifle spoke in controlled bursts, each shot calculated to maximize damage against the alien's natural armor. 1 Koltari dropped, its carapace cracked open like an egg, but 3 more took its place. Vortex's mind raced through tactical options. Standard engagement protocols called for defensive positioning and coordinated withdrawal. Command wanted them to hold until the main force could establish a stronger perimeter, but standard protocols had gotten half of Echo Company killed in. The first week on Meridian Prime, the Koltari didn't fight like humans, they fought like predators, patient and methodical, willing to sacrifice individuals for the good of the pack. His wrist display showed the enemy's movement patterns, red dots closing in from 3 directions, classic Koltari pincer formation. In 5 minutes, they'd be surrounded. In 10, they'd be dead. "Grimm," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "What's our ammunition status?" 3 magazines each. "Maybe for the kid." She ducked as another plasma bolt superheated the air above her head. "Why?" Vortex studied the tactical display, his mind working through possibilities that Command would never approve. The Koltari were advancing with textbook precision, which meant they were predictable. And predictability in warfare was a weakness, waiting to be exploited, because I think I know how to kill them all, he said. "But it means disobeying direct orders." Grimm's laugh was harsh and bitter. Wouldn't be the first time a human soldier did something stupid to save his own skin. But Vortex wasn't thinking about saving his own skin. He was thinking about the 3,000 Koltari warriors massed in the crystal canyons beyond their position and the single human outpost they were preparing to overrun. He was thinking about the transport ships full of colonists who trusted the TDC to keep them safe, and the way Koltari warriors treated human prisoners. Most of all, he was thinking about the thermobaric charges in his pack charges that Command had ordered him to save for the retreat. Command could go to hell. Some wars were too important to fight by the rules. The first Koltari reached their perimeter 17 minutes later. Vortex had spent those precious minutes repositioning his small squad, using the natural crystal formations to create interlocking fields of fire. Grimm understood tactics well enough to follow his lead without question. Baru kept glancing nervously at his comm unit. "Shouldn't we wait for orders?" the private whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Orders are what got Alpha Squad killed." Vortex replied, checking the proximity sensors on his thermobaric charges. Orders are what got Bravo pinned down for 6 hours while the Koltari carved them apart, piece by piece. The aliens came in their characteristic wave formation scouts first to test defenses, followed by warriors in coordinated assault groups. Vortex had studied their patterns obsessively during the long nights in the trenches, learning to read their behavior like a hunter tracking prey. The first scout died to Grimm's rifle, its head exploding in a shower of blue ichor. The second made it 3 steps before Vortex's shot punched through its thoracic cavity. But their deaths served their purpose now. The Koltari pack knew exactly where the humans were hiding. "Here they come," Grimm muttered. The Crystal Canyon erupted in plasma fire. 12 Koltari warriors advanced in perfect synchronization, their weapons laying down overlapping fields of death, while their chitinous forms danced between cover within human grace. Vortex had seen this before. The careful, methodical dissection of human positions that had defined every engagement in this war. But this time, he wasn't following the tactical manual. "Rue, suppressive fire on the left flank," he ordered. "Already moving." "Grimm, keep them focused on your position. Where the hell are you going?" Grimm demanded. Vortex was already gone, his enhanced reflexes carrying him through the crystal maze with desperate speed. The Koltari had adapted to human tactics over 3 years of warfare, learning to counter every strategy the TDC threw at them, but they'd never faced a human soldier willing to break every rule of engagement. The first thermobaric charge went into a cluster of crystal spires, 30 meters behind the advancing aliens. Vortex set the timer for 40 seconds and kept moving. The second charge found its home in a crevice that would channel the blast directly into the Koltari's rear positions. 20 seconds. Behind him, he could hear the steady crack of human rifles, punctuated by the hiss of Koltari plasma weapons. Grimm and Rue were holding position, keeping the aliens focused forward while Vortex executed his insane plan. Professional soldiers would have called it suicide. Vortex called it asymmetric warfare. The third charge was the key. He placed it at the base of a massive crystal formation that overlooked the entire canyon structure. That would create devastating secondary effects when it collapsed. 10 seconds on the timer. Time to run. Koltari mandibles clicked in alarm as they detected his movement. The warriors peeled off from the main assault to intercept him, their 8 legs carrying them across the broken terrain with terrifying speed. Vortex's rifle barked twice, scoring hits on their carapaces, but failing to penetrate. The aliens barely slowed. 5 seconds. Vortex stepped behind the thickest crystal formation he could find and triggered his armor's emergency shields. The countdown reached 0. The first explosion turned 6 Koltari warriors into scattered fragments of chitin and flesh. The second blast created a chain reaction that brought down half the canyon wall in a cascade of razor-sharp crystal shards. The third was where Vortex had gambled everything. The massive crystal spire toppled like a felled tree, its multi-tonnage bulk crushing everything in its path. But more importantly, its collapse destabilized the entire crystal matrix that formed the canyon's foundation. Geological stress fractures that had been building for millennia suddenly found release. The ground shook, crystal formations that had stood for eons began to crack and fall. And in the center of it all, the remaining Koltari warriors found themselves trapped in a death maze of their own making. Vortex emerged from cover to find carnage beyond anything he'd expected. 23 Koltari corpses lay scattered across the canyon floor, their precision formation reduced to scattered body parts and pools of blue ichor. The survivors, if there were any, had retreated deeper into the crystal maze. "Holy shit," Rue breathed over the comm. "How did you know that would work?" Vortex picked his way through the debris, his rifle ready for any remaining threats. "Because I stopped thinking like a soldier and started thinking like a human." But even as he said it, he knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the chittering calls of Koltari reinforcements. The pack had lost a significant portion of its strength, but there were thousands more where these had come from, and Command was going to be very unhappy about his unauthorized use of explosives. The comm channel exploded with static-laced fury. Before Colonel Draytonvex's voice cut through clear and sharp, "Corporal Vortex, you are ordered to explain your unauthorized detonation of strategic assets." Vortex crouched in the crystal rubble, watching thermal signatures move through the distant canyons. The Koltari were regrouping, and their movement patterns suggested they were bringing heavy support units forward. "Sir, engagement protocols were insufficient for the tactical situation. We eliminated 23 hostiles with minimal friendly casualties. You eliminated 23 hostiles with explosives designated for the primary evacuation route. Vex snarled. Your orders were to maintain defensive positions, not to play demolition expert with military assets. Through his scope, Vortex tracked a new signature larger than the standard warriors, with a distinctive heat bloom of integrated weapons systems. Koltari heavy infantry, Colonel. Respectfully, the defensive positions were compromised. Standard engagement protocols have resulted in 60% casualties across Echo Company. Standard protocols exist to prevent reckless endangerment of human personnel. Vex replied, You will return to base immediately for disciplinary action. Vortex watched the heavy Koltari unit position itself behind a crystal outcropping, its weapon systems charging with ominous efficiency. Return to basement, abandoning the forward observation post. That provided early warning for the civilian evacuation. It meant giving the Koltari a clear path to 3,000 colonists who couldn't defend themselves. Negative, sir. Echo 7. Maintaining forward position. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any Koltari war cry. When Vex spoke again, his voice carried the cold certainty of military justice. Corporal, you are hereby relieved of command and ordered to surrender your position to Sergeant Grimm. Failure to comply will result in court-martial for insubordination and endangering military personnel. Grimm's weathered face appeared in Vortex's peripheral vision, her expression unreadable. Rue looked between them with the wide-eyed confusion of a soldier, watching his chain of command collapse in real time. Sir, Grimm interjected on the comm channel, the Koltari are massing for another assault. We need every rifle on the line. Sergeant, you have your orders. Vex replied. Bring Corporal Vortex back to base. That's a direct command. Vortex met Grimm's eyes and saw his own desperation reflected there. She'd been fighting the Koltari longer than anyone in Echo Company. She'd watched good soldiers die following orders that made sense in a tactical classroom, but fell apart when confronted with alien intelligence. That thought in ways human doctrine couldn't anticipate. Orders received, sir, Grimm said slowly. Then she switched to a private channel. Vortex, you crazy bastard. What's your plan? The plan was insanity dressed up as tactics. The plan was everything command had trained them never to do. The plan required accepting that sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to play by rules. That guaranteed defeat. The Koltari heavy unit is positioning for siege bombardment. Vortex explained, highlighting targets on their shared tactical display. Standard doctrine says we fall back and let orbital support handle it. But orbital support is 45 minutes out, and that thing can punch through the civilian shelter shields. In 10 minutes, Rue's voice cracked with tension. So what do we do? Vortex shouldered his rifle and began moving toward the advancing enemy. We kill it before it kills them. The approach required crossing 300 meters of open ground, under the observation of at least a dozen Koltari warriors. Military doctrine classified such an assault as suicide, with a 97% casualty projection, but military doctrine assumed the enemy would respond rationally to human tactics. The Koltari weren't rational. They were apex predators operating on instincts refined across millions of years of evolution. They hunted in packs coordinated through biological imperative, and responded to threats according to patterns that human observers had begun to understand. Vortex's first shot took down a scout at 400 meters, the hypervelocity round, punching through chitin-like paper. The Koltari response was immediate, and predictable warriors converged on his position, while the heavy unit continued its methodical advance toward the civilian shelters. They're not adapting, Grimm observed, her rifle adding to the suppressive fire. They're following standard pack protocols. That was the weakness Vortex had identified. The Koltari's greatest strength, their ability to coordinate as a unified organism, was also their greatest vulnerability. They couldn't break pattern without risking the biological imperatives that made them so effective. The heavy unit paused in its advance, its weapon system swiveling toward the new threat. Vortex could see the energy build up in its primary cannon, the telltale glow that preceded plasma discharge, capable of melting through 6 feet of reinforced steel. He had perhaps 3 seconds before that cannon turned him into superheated vapor. Vortex triggered his armor's emergency boosters and threw himself sideways as the canyon erupted. In white-hot fury, the plasma blast vaporized the crystal formation where he'd been standing, turning solid mineral into expanding gas that seared his armor's heat sensors. But the shot had given away the heavy unit's position, and more importantly, it had revealed the tactical error that would destroy it. The Qatari had positioned their heavy support to maximize its field of fire against static defensive positions, but they hadn't accounted for mobile threats willing to close to point-blank range. The heavy unit's weapons were designed for long-range bombardment at close range. They became liabilities that prevented the creature from using its natural agility. Vortex sprinted forward, using crystal formations as cover while Grim and Rue provided suppressive fire. The Qatari warriors tried to intercept him, but their coordination worked against them. They moved as a pack, which meant they could be predicted and countered 50 meters from the heavy unit. Vortex armed his last thermobaric charge, 25 meters, and the alien's secondary weapons began tracking him 10 meters. A mandible spread wide in what might have been alien surprise at his audacity, 0 meters, and Vortex dug beneath the creature's bulk, jamming the explosive charge directly into its primary weapon housing. The explosion killed them both. Vortex woke to the taste of his own blood and the sound of Grim cursing over the comm channel. His armor's medical systems were flooding his bloodstream with combat stimulants, but he could feel the deep ache in his ribs that suggested internal bleeding. The Qatari heavy unit lay in smoking pieces around him. Its carapace cracked open like a broken egg. Vortex, respond. Grim's voice cut through the static. Your vitals are all over the place. Still breathing. He managed, struggling, to his feet. His rifle had been thrown clear by the explosion. The weapon stock cracked, but still functional. Status report. You killed their heavy support, but there's more coming, Rue said, his voice tight with fear. Lots more. Vortex is tactical. Display painted a nightmare scenario across his visor. The Qatari response to losing their siege unit was a retreat. It was escalation. 3 more heavy units were advancing through the crystal canyons, supported by what looked like an entire battalion of warriors. The aliens had committed everything they had to crushing this single human outpost, which meant they left their own command structure exposed. Grim, patch me through to Colonel Vex, Vortex ordered. Limpid toward better cover. Are you insane? He'll have you shot for disobeying orders? Maybe. But first, he needs to hear this. The connection took 30 seconds to establish. 30 seconds during which Vortex watched red dots multiply across his threat assessment display. When Vex's voice finally came through, it carried the cold fury of military authority pushed beyond all patience. Corporal Vortex, you are under arrest for insubordination, destruction of military property, and endangering the lives of personnel under your command. You will surrender immediately, sir. The Qatari have committed their entire reserve force to this sector. Vortex interrupted. 3 heavy units, approximately 200 warriors, moving in coordinated assault formation toward civilian shelters. Information noted. You will still face court-martial for Colonel, Vortex said, his voice cutting through the static with desperate intensity. They've left their command nexus undefended. The silence that followed was profound. Vortex could almost hear the tactical wheels turning in Vex's mind. The professional soldier warring with the rigid disciplinarian on Meridian Prime. The Qatari had established their primary coordination center in a crystalline formation 12 kilometers south of the human base. Every assault, every strategic decision, every movement of their forces flowed through that single point. And if the aliens had truly committed everything to destroying the forward outpost, that nexus was now protected by nothing more than a skeleton. Crew, explain your assessment, Vex said finally. Vortex pulled up the tactical data, his mind racing through possibilities that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. The Qatari operate through biological imperatives. They can't help but respond to perceived threats with overwhelming force. My actions have triggered their equivalent of a berserker rage. They're throwing everything they have at us because their pack instincts demand it. And you propose what? Exactly. Strike team. Fast and light. Hit the nexus while their attention is focused here. With what forces? Echo Company is down to 30 effective personnel. Bravo Company is pinned down by Qatari flanking units. Alpha Company is gone. Sir, we both know it. Vortex watched another wave of red dots appear on his display, but Charlie Company is intact and mobile. Send them around the long route while the Qatari are focused on us. What he was proposing violated every principle of tactical doctrine. You didn't divide your forces when facing superior numbers. You didn't leave defensive positions to chase strategic objectives. You especially didn't base military operations on the psychological analysis of alien behavior patterns, but conventional tactics had been failing for 3 years. Maybe it was time to try something unconventional, sir. Grimm's voice cut into the channel. We've got incoming. Multiple heavy units, closing fast. Through his scope, Vortex could see them 3 massive Koltari siege units advancing through the crystal maze. Like prehistoric monsters, their primary weapons were already charging, building up the energy needed to punch through reinforced shelters and boil the humans inside alive. Colonel, you need to make a decision, Vortex said. Send Charlie Company after the Nexus, or watch 3,000 civilians die in the next hour. The silence stretched for eternity in the distance. Koltari warriors were taking positions for the final assault. Plasma weapons began to glow with stored energy, and somewhere behind them, families who trusted the TDC to protect them waited in shelters that wouldn't stop what was coming. Charlie Company, this is command. Vex's voice finally crackled across the command frequency. You are go for operation. Linebacker, proceed to secondary objective and eliminate high-value target. Vortex closed his eyes and felt something like relief wash over him. He just convinced the colonel to gamble the entire mission on the tactical analysis of a corporal. Facing court-martial, either Charlie Company would succeed in destroying the Koltari command nexus, or they'd all die knowing they'd at least tried. Something different. Echo 7, hold your position. Vex continued. Keep those heavy units focused on your sector for as long as possible. Understood, sir. Vortex checked his ammunition count to magazines plus whatever Grimm and Rue had left. Against 3 heavy units and 200 warriors, it wouldn't be nearly enough. But it didn't need to be enough. It just needed to be enough to keep the Koltari from noticing that Charlie Company was racing through the crystal canyons toward their most vital strategic asset. The first plasma blast turned a crystal spire into molten glass, and the real battle began. The canyon became a furnace of death as 3 Koltari heavy units opened fire simultaneously. Plasma beams capable of melting through starship armor turned crystal formations into rivers of molten glass, while waves of superheated air set Vortex's tactical gear screaming with proximity alarms. Move, 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 Grimm shouted, hauling Rue from cover as their position disappeared in a pillar of white-hot fury. The private's armor was smoking, heat-stress fractures spider webbing across his chest plate as they dove for deeper cover. Vortex sprinted through the chaos, his rifle tracking targets as Koltari warriors poured through the crystal maze like a flood of chitinous death. His first shot took a warrior center mass, the hypervelocity round punching through Carapace and organic matter in a spray of blue ichor. The second warrior died before it could process the threat, Vortex's bullet, taking its head clean off. But for every alien that fell, 3 more took its place. Charlie Company, this is Echo 7. Vortex gasped into his calm as he slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. How's your progress? Still 30 minutes out, came the reply. Can you hold that long? Vortex looked at his tactical display and watched red dots converge on their position like antibodies attacking an infection. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. We'll hold. He lied. The first heavy unit rounded a crystal outcropping and Vortex got his first clear look at the nightmare bearing down on them, 12 feet tall and built like a living siege engine. The creature's carapace gleamed with the dull sheen of biological armor that had evolved to withstand the most extreme conditions. Multiple weapon clusters sprouted from its thoracic section like malignant growths, each one capable of independent targeting. Its primary cannon swiveled toward Grimm's position. Vortex didn't think he acted on pure instinct, diving from cover with his rifle blazing. His shots sparkled off the creature's armor like fireflies, doing no damage, but succeeding in drawing its attention. The massive weapon turret tracked toward him with mechanical precision. The plasma bolt missed him by inches, close enough that he felt his skin blister through his armor's thermal shielding. But the near miss bought Grimm the second she needed to reposition, her own rifle adding to the storm of fire that was slowly, gradually, beginning to find weak points in the Koltari formations. Targeting junction points, Grimm called out, her shots methodically picking apart the articulated joints where the heavy unit's weapon systems connected to its main body. Rue, suppressive fire on the warriors. The kid had found his courage somewhere in the chaos. His plasma rifle spoke in measured bursts, each shot coordinated with Grimm's targeting to maximize damage. One warrior went down with its primary limb severed. Another collapsed as Rue's shot burned through the neural cluster. that controlled his motor functions, but there were so many of them, and the humans were running out of ammunition. Vortex's rifle clicked empty. He dropped the magazine and reached for his last reload, fingers moving with practiced efficiency even as a Koltari warrior closed to melee range. The alien's attack came in a blur of sharpened limbs and snapping mandibles. Vortex rolled aside, the creature's claws gouging deep furrows in the crystal where his head had been. His sidearm cleared his holster in one smooth motion, 3 shots at point-blank range. The bullets designed to expand and fragment inside soft tissue. The warrior's attack turned into a death spasm as its internal organs liquefied. Vortex. Rue screamed. The second heavy unit had flanked them, its bulk sliding through the crystal maze with predatory silence. Multiple weapon systems locked onto their positions simultaneously, power cells charging with the distinctive whine of imminent death. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The creature had them dead to rights, and they all knew it. Vortex looked at Grim and saw his own resignation reflected in her eyes. They'd bought Charlie Company maybe 15 minutes. It wasn't enough, but it was what they had. The heavy unit's weapons reached full charge, and then the Crystal Canyon erupted in flame as Captain Reese Holloway's platoon hit the Koltari, flanked with everything they had. Echo 7, this is Reaper 6. Holloway's voice cut through the chaos. Thought you might need some backup. 12 human soldiers with heavy weapons and fresh ammunition turned the tide in seconds. Anti-armor rockets streaked across the canyon, explosive warheads designed to crack open spacecraft hole punching through Koltari carapaces like they were made of paper. The heavy unit that had been about to execute Vortex's squad staggered as shape charges detonated against its weapon clusters, but the aliens weren't giving up. If anything, the arrival of reinforcements seemed to drive them into greater fury. Warriors that had been advancing methodically suddenly broke into frenzied charges, their survival instincts overridden by pack imperatives that demanded total victory or total destruction. The melee was horrific. Koltari warriors threw themselves onto human positions with suicidal determination, claws and mandibles seeking flesh, while human soldiers fought back with rifle butts and combat knives. Private Marcus Webb went down under a pile of aliens, his screams cutting off abruptly as chitinous limbs found vital organs. Sergeant Elena Torres emptied her magazine into a warrior's thorax at point-blank range, only to have another alien's claw open her throat in a spray of arterial blood. Vortex found himself fighting back-to-back with Holloway, their combined fire, cutting down warriors as fast as they could acquire targets. But the Koltari just kept coming, even with reinforcements. The humans were still outnumbered 3-1. Charlie Company, please tell me you're close. Vortex panted as he dropped his third warrior in 30 seconds. We've reached the Nexus, came the reply. Beginning assault now. In the distance, Vortex could hear the sound of explosions as Charlie Company engaged the Koltari command center. But distance meant delay, and delay meant more humans were going to die before this nightmare ended. A new sound cut through the battle, the distinctive shriek of Koltari reinforcements arriving. More heavy units, more warriors, an entire assault wave that would finish what the first attack had started. Vortex looked at his ammunition counter and saw zeros across the board. Around him, other soldiers were making the same grim discovery. They'd held the line as long as humanly possible. Now they were going to die for it. The reinforcement wave hit Echo 7's position like a tsunami of chitin and fury. 6 more heavy units emerged from the crystal canyons, their massive forms moving with the inexorable patience of apex predators closing in for the kill. Behind them came what looked like the entire Koltari reserve, hundreds of warriors flowing through the maze. Like a living carpet of death. Form defensive square, Holloway ordered, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. Overlapping fields of fire, make every shot count. Vortex pressed his back against Grim's, their small circle of survivors surrounded by more enemies than any human force had ever faced, and lived to tell about it. His ammunition counter showed 3 rounds remaining. Around him, other soldiers were calling out their own grim tallies. 2 magazines, 4 rounds, rifles down. Switching to sidearm, the Koltari heavy units began their final approach, weapon systems charging with the deadly harmony of an execution squad. Vortex watched the energy build up and calculated they had perhaps 30 seconds before the plasma barrage turned their defensive position into superheated glass. Charlie Company, please tell me you've got something, he called over the comm. Static answered him. Then, Charlie 6 to all units, we've reached the central nexus. but it's heavily defended. Repeat, the target is heavily defended. We're taking significant casualties. Vortex closed his eyes. Charlie Company was the only hope for the 3,000 civilians sheltering behind them. If they failed to destroy the Koltari command center, the aliens would coordinate a systematic extermination of every human on Meridian Prime. All units. This is command. Colonel Vex's voice cut through the channel with absolute authority. Nuclear option is authorized. I repeat, nuclear option is authorized. The words hit Vortex like a physical blow. Nuclear option meant command was willing to irradiate the entire sector to stop the Koltari advance. It meant they'd given up on rescue and moved to containment. It meant everyone on the surface, human and alien alike, was already considered dead. Sir. Negative on nuclear option, Vortex replied, his voice carrying across the command frequency. We still have people down here. Your people are already dead. Corporal. The nuclear strike will prevent the Koltari from regrouping and threatening other colonies. Around him, Vortex's squad exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They'd signed up to protect human civilians, not to be sacrificed as acceptable losses. In some larger strategic calculation, the same command structure that had been willing to court-martial him for tactical innovation was now ready to vaporize him to cover their own failures. Charlie Company, this is Echo 7, Vortex called, over a private channel. What's your real status? We're pinned down 50 meters from the Nexus, came the reply. Heavy casualties. We can see the target, but there's no way to reach it. Describe the Nexus structure. Crystal formation, maybe 30 meters tall. Multiple levels, with what looks like biomechanical integration. The Koltari command cast is definitely inside. We can see the neural interface cables. Vortex's mind raced through possibilities. The Koltari Nexus would be heavily shielded against conventional weapons, but if the structure was integrated into the natural crystal matrix of the planet, it might have structural vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Charlie 6. Do you have seismic charges? Affirmative. Why? The crystal formation isn't just housing their command center, it's part of their command center. The Koltari have integrated their technology with the planet's geological structure. Bring down the formation, and you'll sever every command link simultaneously. The pause that followed was filled with weapons fire as Charlie Company fought for their lives. When the reply came, it carried a note of desperate hope. We can reach the base of the formation, but someone needs to get inside to plant charges. At the structural weak points, I'm on my way, Vortex said. Negative. Holloway cut in. You're surrounded by hostiles. There's no way out of this position. Vortex looked at the Koltari heavy units, their weapons nearly at full charge. In 20 seconds, they'd fire. In 30 seconds, every human in the canyon would be dead. But the aliens were so focused on completing their systematic destruction that they weren't watching for desperate measures. Grim. Remember what I said about thinking like a human instead of a soldier? Her weathered face split in a grin that belonged in a madhouse. You crazy bastard. Whatever you're planning, it's suicide, maybe, but it's also the only chance those civilians have. Vortex activated his armor's emergency beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Corporal Kane Vortex, Echo Company, 7th Squad. Command authorization Tango Delta 77. Requesting immediate orbital bombardment on my position. The response was immediate. Negative, Echo 7. Friendly forces in target area. There won't be any friendly forces in 60 seconds, Vortex replied. Those heavy units are about to finish us anyway, but if you hit them now, the concussion might disrupt their coordination long enough for Charlie Company to complete their mission. What he was asking for violated every principle of military engagement. You didn't call orbital strikes on your own position. You didn't sacrifice squads to create tactical opportunities. You especially didn't trust the timing of space-based weapons to provide split-second coordination with ground operations. But conventional principles had been failing for 3 years. Request confirmed. Vex's voice cut through the static. Orbital strike incoming. All units, take cover. The Koltari heavy units completed their weapon charging sequence and opened fire just as the sky began to burn. Plasma beams designed to melt through starship armor. Mech kinetic projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The collision turned the canyon into a miniature star. Vortex felt his armor's emergency systems trigger as the shockwave lifted him off his feet and hurled him against the crystal wall. His tactical display went dark, overloaded by electromagnetic interference. His comm system dissolved into static. But through the chaos, he could hear something that made his heart race with desperate hope. The Koltari had stopped firing. The orbital bombardment had done more than disrupt their weapons. It had severed the bioneural links that allowed the aliens to coordinate as a unified force. Individual warriors milled in confusion, their pack instincts disrupted by the sudden loss of collective intelligence. Now Vortex shouted, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him, "Charlie Company, execute now." 12 kilometers away, Captain Miranda Voss pressed the detonator that would either save Meridian Prime or turn it into a radioactive wasteland. The seismic charges buried at the base of the Koltari Nexus detonated in perfect sequence, each explosion calculated to maximize structural damage to the crystalline formation that housed the aliens' command infrastructure. The crystal spire that had stood for millions of years collapsed in 30 seconds as it fell. Every biomechanical interface in the Koltari network went dead. Across Meridian Prime, alien forces that had been operating with hive-mind coordination suddenly found themselves isolated, confused, and vulnerable. In the canyon, Vortex watched Koltari warriors stumble like drunks as their neural links went silent. Heavy units that had been unstoppable killing machines moments before now moved with the sluggish uncertainty of creatures operating on instinct alone. It was the turning point humanity had been praying for, and Vortex was to injure to take advantage of it. The battle for Meridian Prime ended not with a bang, but with the confused chittering of Koltari warriors who had suddenly forgotten how to be a unified force. Vortex regained consciousness 3 hours later in a field medical station, his body wrapped in biofoam that was slowly knitting his shattered ribs back together. Through the transparent walls of the shelter, he could see human soldiers moving with the confident purpose of an army that had just won an impossible victory. "Welcome back to the land of the living," Grim said from the cot beside him. Her left arm was immobilized in a regeneration sleeve, but her eyes held the satisfied gleam of a soldier who had lived through hell and come out the other side. "Status report," Vortex croaked. "Koltari forces are in full retreat," she replied. "Turns out when you cut their command network, they revert to individual survival instincts. Most of them are trying to reach extraction points. The ones that aren't are surrendering." Vortex tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as his ribs reminded him of their recent encounter with an orbital bombardment shockwave. "Casualties?" Grimm's expression sober. "Echo Company lost 60% effective strength. Charlie Company lost 30%. But the civilians are safe, and we broke the back of the largest Koltari assault force in the sector." And Command's response that brought a grin back to her weathered features. "Colonel Vex wants to see you. Something about a commendation for tactical innovation under fire." 2 days later, Vortex stood in the prefabricated command center that had been erected on the ruins of the Koltari Nexus. Colonel Vex looked older than his years. The stress of command etched deep in the lines around his eyes. But when he looked at Vortex, there was something like respect in his expression. "Corporal Vortex," Vex began formally, "your actions during the defense of Meridian Prime represent a fundamental shift in our understanding of asymmetric warfare against non-human opponents, sir. I was just doing my job." "No," Vex replied. "You were doing what needed to be done. Regardless of protocol or personal consequences, there's a difference." The citation read like something from a tactical manual for accept ional initiative in the face of overwhelming enemy forces, displaying tactical innovation that resulted in the neutralization of enemy command and control capabilities and the preservation of civilian lives. But the real recognition came from the soldiers who had fought beside him. They didn't call him a hero that wasn't the human way. Instead, they called him the soldier who had figured out how to kill Koltari when everyone else was still learning how to die fighting them. The war itself continued for another 8 months, but it was a different kind of war. Human forces began adapting Vortex's tactics, using the aliens' biological imperatives against them. Small units operating independently disrupted Koltari coordination networks. Asymmetric strikes targeted command nodes rather than fighting positions. Most importantly, human commanders began thinking of the Koltari not as unstoppable monsters, but as predators with exploitable weaknesses. The final battle took place in the Kepler system, where a combined human fleet used Koltari pack behavior to lure their remaining forces into a trap that destroyed their ability to wage interstellar war. The aliens weren't exterminated. That wasn't the human way either, but they were contained. Their expansion stopped. their threat neutralized. 6 months after Meridian Prime, Vortex received a message from a teacher on New Geneva Colony. "Thank you for keeping my students safe. They're learning about tactical innovation in their military history class now. I thought you should know that your disobedience is now part of the curriculum." Vortex deleted the message without replying, but he kept the sentiment. Sometimes the most important orders were the ones you chose not to follow. Sometimes the greatest victories came from refusing to accept that defeat was inevitable. And sometimes, being human meant being willing to break every rule in order to do what was right. The scar tissue around his ribs ached when the weather changed, a permanent reminder of the day he called orbital bombardment on his own position. But it was a small price to pay for the knowledge that 3,000 civilians had lived to see another sunrise dot in the end. That was what being human meant, not the ability to follow orders, but the courage to make impossible choices when following orders would lead to unacceptable outcomes. The Koltari had learned to fear human predictability in war, but they'd never learned to account for human unpredictability in the face of injustice. That, more than any weapon or tactic, was what had ended the war. And in a quiet moment, watching the sunrise over the crystal canyons of Meridian Prime, Corporal Kane Vortex allowed himself to believe that sometimes disobedience was the highest form of duty.